is equity? Let's talk about equity. If you're an investor or a stockholder in a corporation, your shares are really worth only whatever is left when you subtract out all the debts of the corporation.
Wait, people with equity get paid last?
That's right.
I thought this stuff was gold. Stock options, IPOs, crystal, playa.
Let's have a cup of tea and calm down a little bit. Equity is just another mode of financing a business, and there are three common ones that we've already seen. Again, a business can use the revenues that it generates from its operations to finance itself, or, as we've seen, it can borrow money and use debt to finance its operations, or, and now finally we're getting to equity, it can ask investors to contribute money to finance the growth and expansion of the business.
I want the one with the money.
They all involve money. But from the business's perspective, the only question is which of these various modes costs the least amount of money.
I thought the cost of money was money.
Not necessarily. The financial conditions of a corporation or the economy generally might make debt or equity cheaper.
What conditions?
Debt might be cheaper for two reasons. It might be cheaper because of general economic conditions like low interest rates, or it might be cheaper because the particular company at issue has a really good credit record and a very good credit score, and therefore it's easier and cheaper for them to borrow money.
What about equity?
Equity might be considered cheaper for a business for two reasons. One, because it doesn't cost anything, and two, because there may not be any debt available for a particular business.
What do you mean it doesn't cost anything?
Debt almost always comes with an interest charge to the borrower. Equity almost never does.
What do you mean debt isn't available?
If the business is just two pimply-faced guys geeking around in a garage, the odds are pretty good that no one's going to lend them any money.
So why not always use equity? Stock options, playa?
Because a business raises money using equity by giving away portions of the business. And that means, in effect, they're giving away future profits, potentially, and they're certainly giving away future control.
How's that?
Let's look at what equity means to the investor. If the investor puts money in exchange for equity, the business might have a lot of debts and might have very few profits. In fact, a small struggling business might have no profits and might have a lot of debts. And if that's true, then the equity is worth nothing.
I don't remember hearing about this part.
For every Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, there are scores of people who have made zilch on their equity. Compare the downside of equity with the downside of debt for a second. With equity, if the business just doesn't have any profits or has fewer profits than debts, then the equity is worth nothing. With debt, you're usually guaranteed at least some repayment of your principal and some payment of your interest before everything goes badly. Which is to say, debt is a little bit less risky than equity.
Okay, then I'll just be a loan shark.
But you're missing the upside of equity. Consider for a second a business that has just a few debts and a huge stream of revenues. There, the potential residuary interest for the equity holders is unlimited. You could have a huge upside. Compare that upside of equity to the upside of debt. With debt, you negotiate in advance the amount that you borrow and the amount of interest that gets paid. And no matter how good or bad the business is, the lender will never receive more than that. So even if the business is a gold mine, debt is kind of cabined.
Debt is European and lame.
Debt and equity are simply different points on the same spectrum of risk and reward. Debt, generally speaking, is pretty low risk and low reward. Equity, generally speaking, is high risk and high reward. Let's move now from the general concept of equity, which is true in any sort of business, even if it's a sole proprietorship or a partnership or a corporation, that is the amount that's left over after debts are paid. And let's move to the more specific concept of equities, which really refers only to one thing, which is stocks and shares held in corporations.
To be honest, I'm a little short at the moment, so I'm not going to be paying for diddly.
That's okay. Another regular feature of equity is that it can be earned as well as purchased. When you think about those pimply-faced entrepreneurs, most of them are getting equity in exchange for coding their little hearts out, not because they're writing big checks to their companies.
What exactly do they get for dorking up their vibe in a cave?
What they get is a stock certificate, or at least that's what they used to get, a piece of paper that provided evidence of their ownership in the corporation. These days it's all kept track of on a computer, and stock certificates are kind of a rare artifact. But the general idea is that they receive a portion of the overall residuary interest, some percentage of the company. If it's just one person, the odds are pretty good they have 100%. If it's a partnership, it might just be 50%. But the way things generally work is that as each new investor joins the company, more and more shares are created. Therefore, the overall ownership is diluted down for each of the existing shareholders.
Nothing is ever as good diluted.
Really? Bringing in new investment helps the business grow. That's why you sell equities. You want to bring in money that helps you expand your business. Just ask Bill Gates. Do you think he'd rather have 50% of the tiny little business he had in his garage once upon a time 20 years ago, or would he rather the 1 or 2% that he has of Microsoft today?
So what's getting diluted if not the money?
We've generally been talking about the economic attributes of equity, but another interesting component that comes by virtue of being an equity holder is a democratic component, that is a voting component of the shares. Everyone that holds equity shares typically has a right to vote on the decisions of the business. So in addition to the economic value, you also have this democratic feature. The problem, generally speaking, in large corporations is that so many investors have such a few stake that there's actually a rational reason to be apathetic and not to participate in the overall control of the business. That, of course, means that we have to have a lot of faith in the people who do run the business, the officers and managers. But generally speaking, the democratic component of equity is not worth as much as it might seem in principle.
Sweet. Democracy now.
Well, it's not that bad. If somebody is a real concern about doing something democratic with a corporation, they can buy shares from other people and they can mobilize investors and they can conduct what's known as a proxy war, which is in a sense a way of voting their shares to oust old management and bring new management in. But sure, generally speaking, even large investors don't have very large percentages of a corporate equity stake.
Even for Sergey and the other guy?
Even for Sergey and the other guy.
Word.